My wife keeps waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I wake up, still half asleep. I can hear the toilet running, the flush must have woken me. I reach over to my wife's side of the bed and feel that it's empty, but still warm from her body heat. I hear the bathroom door swing open, and the hardwood floorboards begin to creak as she makes her way back to bed. As she climbs under the covers, I wrap my arm around her, feeling her stomach. "The baby still putting pressure on your bladder?" I mumble. She sighs in confirmation. "I can usually hold it, but these last few nights have been rough." The sound of water refilling the toilet tank stops abruptly. The house is quiet again. I grunt, before turning back over and drifting off to sleep. I wake up again, half asleep. I can hear the toilet running, the flush must have woken me. I reach over to my wife's side of the bed and I feel her warm body. She jumps slightly at my touch and her breathing becomes rapid as she flips over to face me. I pull my hand back and open my bleary eyes, confused. She looks at me with extreme concern. "I thought it was you in the bathroom." She hisses at me, as loudly as she dares. My heart begins to pound in my chest as I lift myself up onto one elbow. I hear the bathroom door swing open, and the hardwood floorboards begin to creak as someone makes their way back to bed. I woke up to a strange picture on my phone. I woke up this morning with the urge to look through my photo library, but what I discovered made me truly terrified. I don't even feel safe in my own home. I live in a nice, quiet apartment complex in a small, safe, countryish town right outside of the bigger city I grew up in. This area has always been safe and is rated one of the best places to live/raise a family. I live with my boyfriend who usually likes to stay up late, but we were both beat after working long days at our jobs yesterday. We both ended up in bed around 10. He fell asleep immediately, while for some reason I just could not fall asleep. I was out after about an hour and a half. This morning, I had the uncontrollable urge to check my photo library. When I opened it, my eyes fell to the bottom of the screen where I found a portrait photo taken from the foot of our bed, showing my boyfriend and I asleep. The worst part is I sleep with my phone under my pillow. What the fuck? The thing outside the window. It all started with a faint noise that brought me from slumber. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was a bird tapping against the window, or maybe even a bat. The noise continued behind the thick curtain. I didn't want to get out of bed to check. I was fucking terrified. All kinds of scary possibilities crept into my mind, like, what if it's a serial killer taunting me before breaking in to cut my throat? Or maybe it was a burglar. But why would a burglar want to alert me to their presence? A burglar didn't seem likely. It's definitely a serial killer. The tapping became louder, and so too did the beat of my heart. I needed to know what it was. My nerves couldn't take it any longer. I slowly got out of bed, and snuck over to the window, all the while I couldn't get that window scene from Stephen King's Salem's Lot out of my head. Vampires aren't real, you are just being silly. I hesitantly drew the curtain. A pale, round moon-like face was peering in at me with bulbous, jet-black eyes that bulged from their sockets. It smiled a horrible grin, like the smile of a great white shark that has caught the scent of blood. Those teeth looked like they could chew up Sheffield steel with ease, and sink into flesh like a hot knife through butter. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was all just a nightmare. Yet the creature remained floating outside the window, as its hideous grin widened even further. "Aren't you going to let me in?" The creature pressed its round white face up against the glass. "It's awfully cold out here. Who are you?" I asked, failing to hide the tremble in my voice. "A friend," the creature replied, with a sinister tone that suggested otherwise. "Go away. Leave me alone." I closed the curtain and proceeded to grab my baseball bat from under the bed. The creature continued to tap at the window, followed by a new sound, a wet, squeaky sound like a damp sponge wiping the glass. I gripped the baseball bat tightly, approached the window again, then drew the curtain. The glass was now covered in thick snail trails of saliva, as the creature peered through. "Are you going to let me in or what?" "No. Now go away." "Too bad. We could have had a lot of fun." The creature licked the glass with its long forked tongue. "I can almost taste you." The creature then floated off into the night. I didn't sleep at all that night, and the next morning I saw police cars, and an ambulance outside Jill's house down the road. I would later find out that Jill had been brutally killed, and partially eaten by a wild animal that had somehow got in through her upstairs window. But I know the real story. She had let the moon-faced creature in. My wife is very possessive of our son. My son was born about 7 months ago, and I can count on one hand how many times I have actually held him. My wife had become extremely protective of him and refused to let anyone else but her hold him. I have tried talking to her about this, but she will just turn the conversation around and imply that I am suggesting that she is a bad mother. A doctor friend of mine told me that she probably has postpartum depression and that I just need to support her. I have tried this, but honestly, it is heartbreaking not being able to spend time with my son. I have tried offering to feed him, but she refuses as a mother's milk is important. Every night, I am awoken by the sounds of his crying, and my wife will practically sprint out of the bed to go feed him. Tonight, I woke up and could hear his cries from his nursery. I glanced over at my wife and was relieved that she was fast asleep with her phone in her hand. I quietly walked into the nursery and carefully picked up my son's crying body. I heard something drop to the floor and bent down to pick it up. A chill ran up my spine as I picked up the speaker that was playing a baby's cries. I almost vomited as I unfolded my son's blankets to discover his rotting remains inside. My wife ran up behind me and snatched the body from my hands, and brought it up to her breast. I could see the madness in her eyes as she pressed a button on her phone, and the speaker started playing a suckling noise. I should have read the reviews. My girlfriend moved out 3 weeks ago. My cat, Ruck, was really close to her, and now that she's gone, I can tell he's a bit lonely, especially when I'm at work. I came home a few times to my curtains ripped up, or all the toilet paper in shreds. The last straw was when I came home after working late to find he had clawed a hole the size of a dinner plate into the side of the sofa. I decided I had to do something. I tried different toys, even catnip, but nothing worked. One night while browsing Amazon, I saw a pet camera. It's a tiny camera that records your pet on a live feed so you can monitor their behavior while you're away. It even has an audio function so you can talk to them. Sounded silly, but hey, I love my furry dude, so I bought it. I got overnight shipping and installed it immediately. I decided to set it up in my bedroom, as that was where Ruck dwelled most. My first day at work, I think I checked that camera 30 times. When I spoke into the microphone, Ruck seemed to be happier, and I noticed there was no destruction around the house either. By day 4 I figured I'd solved the problem with Ruck. That leads me to right now. About 30 minutes ago I climbed in bed with Ruck, ready to close my eyes, when my phone buzzed. A notification from the pet cam. I almost ignored it, sure I just triggered the thing. But I opened it anyway. What I saw made my grip tighten on the phone. Instead of a video of myself in bed, I saw a man, tall, gangly, with pale skin, and large eyes. He was moving into my room with exaggerated steps, like a sneaking cartoon character. He got right up to the lens, so close I could almost smell his rotten breath, and he smiled. I immediately paused the video, terrified. I looked at the spot where the man should have been standing, but there was no one there. I went onto Amazon and found the pet cam, and read the reviews, hoping for some weird glitch. It had to be a joke, right? The first dozen reviews were pretty standard, but it was the last that caused me to bolt upright. The customer complained that the camera was on a time delay, sometimes as much as 15 minutes. I went back to the video and pressed play with shaky fingers. I watched in horror as the man slithered under my bed, giving the camera a wink before disappearing in the darkness. Then I saw myself enter the room and climb in bed before the video ended. Now I'm sitting in my bed, knowing he's under it. I could call the police, but I doubt I'd have time. So please, do yourselves a favor and read the reviews. I was trapped in our home with entities that had pretended as my mom. It was already late at night and I was scrolling through my cell phone like I always do every weekend. A couple of hours later, I heard the door had opened before it was followed by a familiar voice, babbling in the kitchen downstairs. It was my mom. The tapping sound of her shoes gleefully announced her arrival. "Craig, come here. I have something for you," she said. My lips curled into a half smile. I quickly jumped out of bed and put my phone in the pocket of my hoodie jacket. I had been expecting her to come by since it was Saturday, and it had been a while since she last came home. She had been too busy with her job these past few days that she wasn't able to go home. "Just a second," I answered. As I was about to go downstairs, I heard a faint voice that came from the unoccupied room next to mine. It was my mom, saying, "Craig, don't go down there. That wasn't me." The way her voice cracked, I knew she was terribly scared, and so was I. Upon hearing those words, I froze in an instant. I just stood there and couldn't even make a single move. I didn't know what to do during that nightmarish moment. Perhaps, that was the longest minute of my life. Trembling with fear, I slowly shifted my gaze to the room where my mom was hiding, and the door was slightly open. The room was supposed to be in complete darkness, if it wasn't for the presence of small amount of light that came from the light poles on the streets, which made the room dimly lit. As I kept on staring at the empty room through the door that had been left ajar, a strange humanoid silhouette with an oddly gigantic, red round eyes suddenly appeared near the window. The sudden horrific realization hit me that I had made a huge mistake when I looked at its eyes. My knees were shaking in utter terror. I could literally hear my heart constantly pounding at a ridiculous rate, as if it were about to explode. I was gasping for air. A great amount of cold sweat were dripping excessively that it drenched my clothes. I almost got a heart attack when I heard my phone rang so loud inside my pocket. As my hands were shaking uncontrollably, I tried to reach my phone in the pocket with all my might. Luckily, it was Mom. I answered it immediately. "Mom, are you?" I wasn't able to complete my sentence because I got interrupted by a terrible turn of events. "Hey, Craig, I just got arrived at the supermarket. Do you have anything you want me?" I didn't have the chance to respond to her because I had already passed out. Monsters under the bed. The scream got me moving, lurching upright and stumbling towards his bedroom. I ran, even knowing that nothing was wrong. Your kid screaming like that just gets you going. I found him sitting upright in bed, eyes wide with fear. Another nightmare. "Hey champ, you okay?" He shook his head no. "Had a bad dream?" He shook his head no again. "Monsters." I nodded and crouched, flipping my phone's flashlight on as I scanned under his bed. "Well, your dad must have scared them off, because there are 0 monsters under this bed." I stood up, watching my reflection in the frames of the photos hanging on his wall. So large in comparison to his tiny body. "Not there." "Closet." I opened the closet door now, doing my best impression of a comprehensive search. I turned back towards the bed. "Sorry, Dad." "Hey bud, it's okay. Your dad just makes the monsters run, they're too scared of him." The movement in the reflection caught my attention. An arm, reaching from the closet. Something too long and inhuman to be real. "No Dad. I'm sorry. I told them you would open the door if I yelled." Someone was watching me outside the door. I was sorting out the papers I had to present to my boss at work tomorrow. It was well after midnight. I was about to go to bed when I heard a knock at the front door of my house. I live alone and don't communicate much with my neighbors because I just moved into the neighborhood a week ago. I did not immediately respond to the knock on my door, thinking that it might have been one of the drunken revelers who just happened to be in the wrong house. But when the knock came a second time, seemingly more insistent, I began to get nervous. Who had the sudden urge to drag me out of the house at this hour? I walked slowly toward the front door, trying to control my anxiety. I stopped at the front door, but before I could ask who was standing there, I leaned against the peephole and froze. There was a scary-looking man, if you could call him that, looking right at me on the other side of the door. He had no clothes on, none at all. The creature's skin was pale, and it was impossible to see the eyes on its face. At first I wrote it off to the darkness outside, but then I realized that instead of eyes, the creature had only slits, as if it had been clumsily cut out with scissors by a child. The creature's arms reached almost to the ground, and its legs were unnaturally straight and thin, like sushi sticks. It stared at me with its face almost completely pressed against the peephole of the door. As soon as I came out of my daze, I walked back to the phone on the nightstand, trying not to make a sound. I was going to call 911, but first I wanted to see if I was imagining things. I'd be a complete idiot if no one was at the door when the cops arrived. I slowly made my way back to the door and dialed the numbers on my phone on the way out. When I looked through the peephole, I saw that there was no one at the door. I guess it was time for me to stop leaving work for the late hour. It's a good thing I checked to see if anyone was at the door and didn't just call the police. There's only one problem. I can't take my eyes off the peephole. Because right now someone's breathing down my neck. Mommy's new boyfriend. I was around 12 when my mother got a new boyfriend. To be honest, he was an asshole. I hated him since day one. He was rude, and overall, he was a piece of shit. When he was at our house, I was locked in my room for a whole day, while they were in the kitchen or in the other bedroom. Then he moved in with us. It wasn't unexpected, but I still just couldn't believe it. I wanted to leave, or rather, I wanted him to leave. That fucking idiot. He wasn't working, so when my mom was at work, he often slapped me, then locked me in my bedroom. He didn't let me out. I had to stay there without food or water until my mother got home. I couldn't tell her, as her boyfriend didn't allow it. He told me he would kill me if I said a word to her. One day, however, my mom found him in the attic, hanging from a rope. He was dead. She couldn't believe he had committed suicide. I was lucky they buried him without further investigations, otherwise, they would have found the cyanide in his body. That bastard used me as a slave and wanted me to make a coffee for him. So I did it. I made his coffee with an extra ingredient. It was so easy to kill him. It was much harder to drag his dead body up into the attic and hang him, but at least he was dead, and I was living alone with my mother again. I convinced my daughter fairies were real. Now she won't speak to me. To get Grace pumped about the big move, I told her our new home was inhabited by fairies. See, we were relocating to an island in the north of Scotland, and she wasn't exactly thrilled. But Dublin only served as a painful reminder of her mother. I sorely needed the change of scenery. The promise of fairies made her face light up. Historically, those creatures played a huge part in the islanders' belief system, so I assumed the tourist board leaned into this for publicity, like the Loch Ness Monster. The Feyfolk Community Advisor sounded like a made-up title. After we settled in, Grace spent her days fairy spotting, which entailed wandering the coast and exploring various enchanted caves. Seeing her thrive meant I didn't even mind the locals, who all seemed a little off. It felt like, wherever we went, they'd constantly smile at us. It seemed odd, given the permanent cold shoulder we'd received since arriving. Then, as my daughter and I sat down to dinner one evening, there came a knock at the door. It was Grace. Another Grace, identical to the first in all ways except hair, which stuck out in every direction, almost feral. While I stood there, mystified, Grace asked this girl who she was, why they looked and sounded exactly alike. She claimed her name was Grace, said she moved here from Ireland, and that her mommy died in a car crash. Quickly I summoned the community leader who pointed out markings carved into the back of feral Grace's knee, hot and inflamed. It resembled a zigzag inside two triangles. The leader pulled me aside and explained my daughter would die if we didn't destroy her changeling doppelganger. Then she summoned the islanders into the woods for a cleansing ritual which, as parent to the imity, required me to douse the oil and toss the lantern. After the ceremony, Grace finally settled in at school and made some friends. I tried desperately to forget what happened. However, just as Dublin reminded me of my wife, the island now made me picture my daughter, begging her daddy to untie her while the flames surged and swelled. And so, I accepted a job in London. On our final day, the leader popped over to say goodbye. With that sly smile the locals all seemed to share, she handed me a gift and said not to open it until we reached England. I made it as far as the ferry. It was a book about Fey folk and their spells. Halfway through, a page had been marked with a post-it note. I flicked open to a chapter depicting zigzags inside two triangles like the one on the changeling's leg, and then read the accompanying text. In order to assume human form, a changeling will carve runes into its victim flesh, thereby allowing it to imitate their physical appearance. And as I glanced up from the book, my daughter smiled at me. That awful, familiar, islander smile.